Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism midweek show. I hope the shirt's not blinding you. We changed today, it's very warm today. Our midweek shows, as you know, folks, are all about the bigger world. And we will look out because hopefully one day soon Scotland will be joining the other nations of the world. And it's only right that we keep up. And one of the conversations that came up in our weekend show was the question of Africa. And I don't think anyone in the West pays it enough attention, and we don't get enough good news stories out of Africa. And we get wrong, as we do with everything else, whether it be Scottish independence, whether it be economics, whether it be the Ukraine war, whatever. You know how much it's distorted till we get the narrative the ruling elite want us to have. So it's right to get the other side of it, and that's what we're hoping to do. I have got, joining me today, I have a Umar Isa Dandago, and I hope I've pronounced that properly, Umar, who's a freelance journalist. He's based in Kano State in northern Nigeria. He's the founder of Global Arena TV. It's a YouTube channel that hosts newsmakers from different countries to talk about big international issues, just as we're doing here in Through a Scottish Prism. So Umar is in his final year of journalism at the Bayero University Kano. He's also an undergraduate, and he's also an English teacher, a public speaking coach, a translator, and he's now going to be Through a Scottish Prism's African expert. And I take great pleasure in welcoming Umar to Through a Scottish Prism. Umar, welcome.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Roddy McLeod, for finding me worthy to speak on your podcast. I feel honored to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. As I said there at the intro, and you probably heard me, is that the problem with most people here in the West is the only time we get to hear about Africa is when there's a war or a coup or a famine or something wrong. And we think it's time to redress that balance and talk about the positive things, the good things that are going on, as well as the things that are, pertinent and topical. I mean, Africa is like everywhere else in the world at the moment. It's going through huge changes, and huge changes for the better, I hope. What do you think?
Well, thank you very much indeed once again, Roddy McLeod, for giving me the opportunity to speak on your podcast channel. It's absolutely and undeniably true and clear that most of the time, or the only time when we hear about Africa on the global media or the Western media, is when there is a war or famine, anything negative. That has been the trend for an extended period of time. But these days, things have started to get changed. I believe we are going to discuss some of these issues and some of these changes in the course of the program. One of the reasons is because of the colonialism. Of course, Africa was and still is, to some extent, a victim of colonialism.
For sure.
Remember the Berlin Conference, I believe, in which the major European countries sat down and they stratified Africa. France took as many countries as possible. Britain also took as many countries as possible, among a few other European countries like Portugal, and so on and so forth. So that has happened for an extended period of time. Through to the 19th century to 20th century, for example. In the 20th century, especially the last part of the century, we saw the rise in newspapers and television and the radio, of course. So most of the stories that are coming out of Africa are mostly negative. Let me give you examples. In 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide that took place in 1944 between the Tutsi and the Hutu. I mean, it's one of the most terrible events that has happened on the African continent. And it happened, of course. It was a fight, it was a genocide that took place between two ethnic groups in Rwanda in 1994, a year before I was born. So I'm sure none of the Western media organizations would turn a blind eye and refuse to report that issue because it's a major issue. We believe that human beings are created to have their own biases. Of course, there's one professor that conducted a research which indicated that human beings are more interested in negative stories. So if you bring any positive story on the Western media organizations that a leader in Africa, for example, is building roads and railways, for example, rail tracks, for example, from one village to another in his own country, is not a news. But when you have an ethnic group massacring, killing, murdering another ethnic group, this is news, of course. So in journalism, there is this issue of bad news sells more, and bad news is more attention grabbing than the good news. It's a fact, of course. Africa is has been characterized with lots of bloodshed, coups and counter coups. Nigeria has shared its own, has also got its own share of coups and counter coups. We got our own independence in 1960, but then a few years in 1967 or 1968, there was a coup which deposed and overthrew the leaders. Most of them were from the northern part of Nigeria, and it was staged by some people that were opposed to the north. Of course, the Igbos, and that's why up to now there has never been an Igbo person being elected as the president of Nigeria. So coups and counter coups have happened in Nigeria and other African countries. Famine, remember Ebola virus. Okay, Ebola virus erupted in 2014 and it killed many people in some West African countries, including Nigeria. But the epicenter of the Ebola virus was in Liberia, Sierra Leone. Do you understand? This is very definitive of Africa, for example, typical of Africa. Those negative stories are part and parcel of us. They're entrenched. We don't have good leaders in Africa. The leaders that are there in Africa are only in the position of power to enrich themselves, to enrich their families. And I'm not saying this because I'm a journalist. I'm also saying this because I'm a citizen of Nigeria and I'm a citizen of Africa and a citizen of the world. So there are so many negative stories coming out of Africa. Yes, of course, but we should not bury our heads in the sand and think that like all is well. So there are so many problems, but there are a good side of Africa, of course, which I believe.
Good. Well, we're going to talk about some of the good things, but I mean, trust me, coming from Scotland, and my audience is majority of Scottish people. They understand what being a colony is all about. We've been a colony of England for quite some time, although we're working on it. But talking of that,
you're working on it. You want to break. You want to break away from England.
Absolutely.
But the last time I checked, most of the Scottish prefer to be under England, to be part of the Britain.
That's another discussion for another day. It was 55-45. But actually, it was the indigenous Scottish people voted overwhelmingly, 53 to 47, to leave. It was incomers, if you like, our colonialists who were in Scotland who voted no. They were allowed to vote in it, and they voted no. And it was them that carried the vote. Okay. But that's another story. We're not here to talk about that. But there has been, in the last 3 years, there's been 7 coups in Northwest Africa, mainly French colonies, ex-French colonies. That, is leading to the multipolarity. And it seems that there's a new confidence growing among African nations. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, you have spoken about 2 things. First of all, multipolarity, and then the issue of coups. Let me start by addressing the issue of coups that we have seen. We have seen about, as you said, 7 to 9 coups since 2020. I said earlier, there have been multiple coups in Nigeria. We also got our own fair share of coups and counter coups. These coups that have happened from 2020 to this year, 2023, are so special that they have happened mostly in the French, in the French ex-colonies, for example, those French-speaking countries, those that were colonized by France. And it's so interesting to know that one of the reasons why they have decided to topple those quote unquote democratically elected presidents of those countries is because they are sick and tired of them. Some of them have stayed in power for long. For example, in Gabon, the recent country to have been hit by this coup is Gabon, not Gambia, Gabon, in Central Africa. Ali Bongo, the president of the country that was deposed, is the son of Umar Bongo that had ruled the country until his death for about 42 years. And since 2009, this guy, Ali Bongo, has been ruling the country, Gabon. And he wanted to be re-elected for a third term. And that, in fact, the election took place on Saturday. And then the following Wednesday, when the election was announced that he had won the majority of the votes, the military decided to topple him. So one of the reasons why we have had these coups is, number one, resentment and anger against those leaders that have been in power for long. So in total, the Bongo family, both the father and the son, have been ruling Gabon for about 50 years. So the people there are tired of being ruled by one family, which they believe the family has been corrupt. The family members, the leaders there, have owned multiple expensive houses and luxurious cars and so on and so forth. They're living expensive lives. Do you understand? Not only in Africa, but they have properties in the UK, in the US, and other Western countries. So this is something very interesting. That's why they said, we are tired of you because these things have happened. Go. And one amazing thing about the coup in Gabon, which was a little bit different from the coup that we recently had witnessed in Niger Republic, our next door neighbor, is because immediately after the coup, citizens came out protesting, not against, but in favor or in support of the military. They said now they are going to get the absolute freedom that they have been demanding for. Niger Republic also deposed there earlier in, was it July, at the end of July, they deposed their own democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, who was in Nigeria a few months ago to commission the Dangote refinery that was built by Aliko Dangote, the richest person in Africa. He was there, he attended that. He's a very good friend of the Nigerian government. And that's why Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the president of Nigeria, was very serious about this issue, who's now the head of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, a regional bloc.
Can I ask you, would it be fair to say that a lot of these people like Ali Bongo have been more than helped by the ex-colonialist powers and the West? Because they'll then, for example, I noticed up in Niger, one of the first things that the military leaders have done is they've increased the price of uranium from 8 cents to $200, which is the market going rate. And at 8 cents a kilo for uranium is good business for France, bad business for Niger. And so a lot of these presidents who were put in place were there really as placemen of the Western colonialists. Would that be a fair shout?
Well, I think this issue of French influence has been felt very, very much hard by the colonial, like by the French colonies, Niger and other countries there. That is one of the reasons why they decided to depose those governments. They think that you cannot be elected as the president of Niger Republic, Gabon, Mali, and Burkina Faso without the blessing of France, for example. Those leaders, especially the one that is also next to our country, the president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, he has been there for about 40 years or so, ruling the country, and he's now in his 90s, very sick. There are reports saying that he's not even the one ruling the country, it's somebody else, but he still is clinging to power very, very tightly. So they think that, and they believe that France has been exploiting their resources and has been exploiting them through their leaders, and that's why they think the leaders have to go.
Yeah, but the colonial powers might have left Africa, but they left their corporations behind, didn't they, to keep the financial control over these African countries?
Yes, it's true. Yeah, it's true. Of course, a lot of people believe that we are experiencing neo-colonialism here in Africa. They have their own companies and corporations working in different parts of the continent, influencing not only the business environment, but also the leadership that we have on the continent in different countries. This has been a case in the African continent, on the African continent, and this is one of the grievances that people are sharing. For example, in Nigeria, there is a difference between the case in Nigeria and the case in French-speaking countries here in Africa. We think here in Nigeria that Britain does not exert a great deal of force and influence and meddling in the internal affairs of our own countries directly, unlike those French-speaking countries, French ex-colonies, as you have put it. Their case is so much so that there is a visibility of the French influence there. Even the citizens are saying that they are sick and tired of it. While here in Nigeria, it's more of a conspiracy theory. People are sharing, saying that here in Nigeria, so, of course, the West.
For the sake of my viewers, can I ask you about Nigeria now? Nigeria is extremely well off in oil and gas. You have huge reserves of both. Do you have a national Nigerian oil company looking after that? Or are the American oil companies and the British oil companies in there handling that for you, for want of a better phrase?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, what I can tell you is that there have been oil companies from the West, like Shell, that have been Shell and Chevron that have been operating in the country for long, and there has been disputes among the original indigenous people of that land from which or from where the oil is drilled, is excavated from the ground. So they have been complaining that
Scotland understands that one only too well.
Oh my God! Yeah. So this is So you guys have oil there. The region from where the oil is being gotten there is called Niger Delta, and there are so many. There's a great deal of oil reserve there. In fact, it is the major oil producing region of the country. The country is heavily dependent on the oil that is produced, that is drilled from that place. And most of the companies that are there are Western companies, of course, Western corporations that are there. So there have been a lot of problems here and there with compensations, environmental degradation. They have been polluting the environment, the water there, because there is a water body there. The fishes there are said to have been contaminated. Like the whole area is contaminated. We have seen a couple of Hollywood and Nollywood movies that have been produced portraying the damage in that place. In fact, to be honest with you, it is far away from where we live. We are living in the northern part of Nigeria, here in Kano State, northwestern part of Nigeria. We are much closer to Niger Republic than we are to the place where the oil is being digged and is being drilled. Excuse me.
Have the ordinary Nigerians benefited from the oil and gas reserves?
Excuse me. I will take the question. Let me take some water.
Yeah, please do. Me too. Water. Umar, have the ordinary Nigerians benefited from oil and gas reserves?
Well, a lot of Nigerians, as a journalist, I cannot tell you my opinion, and this is one crazy part of the traditional mode of journalism, that journalists are expected to be neutral, even though Christian Amampo, the chief international correspondent for CNN, is saying that neutrality means complicity, well, kind of thing like that. Well, as a journalist, I can tell you that a lot of people in Nigeria have been complaining about the fact that they are not benefiting anything from the oil reserves that Nigeria is blessed with. Nigeria is super rich, heavily and extremely rich, blessed with a great deal of natural resources and human capital. Alhamdulillah, yeah, and human capital, but yet the citizens are among the poorest on earth. There was a time when Nigeria was ranked as the poverty capital of the world. A lot of people are living below the poverty line. You can see many people, more people are living below $1. Well, this report that many Nigerians were living below $1 was produced about a decade ago, and now the thing has worsened. The situation has aggravated, and this is because of a policy that has been introduced by this new administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who was elected back in February this year and was sworn in on the 29th of May this year. He said that he removed the subsidy that is on fuel, on petroleum products. Usually, Nigeria produces the oil. The crude oil is from Nigeria. Then we export it to the oil market globally. We sell it, and then we buy the refined oil. That's a lot of people believe this is something that a lot of people refer to as a crazy idea that has been in existence for an extended period of time. We have the oil in Nigeria. We export it to the global market. They buy it in dollars, and then we use the money to buy the refined oil from them. So who is benefiting from who? Are we benefiting from them, or they are benefiting from us the most? So that's a lot of people. This is something that a lot of people refer to as a naive idea, crazy idea, something that we need to deal with. And this is where the issue of neocolonialism comes in, and the conspiracy theories that people are sharing, that these Western countries are still exercising a great deal of not only pressure, but influence and meddling in their own internal affairs. We have refineries in Nigeria, and there is one even next to our state, in Kano State, a few kilometers away from Kano State. It's a 6-hour journey. The last time I went to Kaduna was in 2019. We spent like 6 hours on the way from Kano to Kaduna. So there is a refinery there in that northern state called Kaduna, and there are other refineries in other parts of the country. But we are not producing, we're not refining the oil in our own country. So this is, as a lot of people believe, a shame on the country. So now, what happened on the 29th of this month, on the 29th of May this year, was that the president, in his inaugural speech, he said that the subsidy on petrol is gone. So no sooner had he mentioned that, a lot of the prices of a lot of commodities had started to skyrocket. So that's the issue. Now we are experiencing a great deal of inflation in the country. Nothing is now cheap. Everything is now expensive. Even this Bayero, for example, that you're going to buy, it's going to cost more than the amount you used to buy it before the 29th of May this year. So we are not, a lot of people believe they're not benefiting.
The value add, exactly. The Western companies come in and steal the value added. Going back to our first part, we're talking about 7 coups in 3 years in Northwest Africa. Do you see that spreading to the West and to the South in Africa? The people of Africa are going to say, we're not getting a fair deal here. It's time for change. Do you think they're ready for enough is enough?
Well, this enough is enough saying is a popular saying in Africa. I can remember in the 1990s, late 1990s, when the former head of state of Nigeria, the former military head of state called Sani Abacha, who is portrayed by many Western media as a bad guy, as a corrupt guy, said something like this in one of his famous speech that a lot of people in Nigeria are now listening to on their own mobile devices. He said, enough is enough. So this is a popular saying, not only in Nigeria, but in Africa as a whole. Well, it's a little bit complex because most of the people in an English-speaking, in the English-speaking countries, do not think that they are in need of military regime. Okay, I said this is a complex situation. I'm going to try as much as I can to unpack it. Like here in Nigeria, a lot of people don't think that it is possible for the present democratically elected government to be overthrown by the military or establishment. This is because A, the military is in very much good condition, is very much friendly with the political elites. That's number one. And number two, the citizens normally don't think that the UK or Britain exercises a lot of influence and meddling in our own internal affairs, unlike in Niger Republic and Gabon and Cameroon, even though Cameroon has not had any coup, where France is said to have been exerting a lot of influence in the internal affairs of those countries. So it's a little bit tricky in Nigeria. People don't think that the military are going to or are likely to overthrow the elected governments. But the poor people, because of the enormity and intensity and extremity of the poverty that they have been experiencing in for the past many years, they are praying, and I have to say it very, very carefully, that some portions or a portion of the poor people are praying for what? For the military to take over. And those people who are praying for the military to take over in Nigeria are very young people, desperate to get rich, desperate to go to school, or desperate to go to market and be rich, for example. And they were not alive pretty much in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and even through to 90s, when the military, when Nigeria experienced a full-scale military rule. So elders who are pro-democracy in Nigeria are saying that anybody who is praying for Nigeria to be under a military rule is just crazy, because they don't know what it means to be ruled with an iron fist by a military dictator. So as I said, as a journalist, I have to exercise caution and have to be in the middle to just provide different aspects, different angles of the matter. So there are people who are hoping for the military to take over simply because the politicians have been so corrupt that they have done nothing to alleviate the poverty that has been excruciating the people in the country. So, but then pro-democracies, people who are pro-democracy are saying that, well, no matter how bad a politician is, but democracy is better than military rule. But at the same time, that brings us to the debate about whether or not democracy is the perfect system of government in the country. And I believe this is a topic for another day. But a lot of people believe that democracy has failed them in Africa.
Yeah, well, there's democracy and there's democracy. When we're supposed to have democracy in our country, we don't really have real democracy. But that, again, as you say, another story for another day. But I started this show by saying, there's not enough good news stories, and we've not been really covering them here. But I'd like to get on to some of them. There's one of the ones that I really like, and you and I spoke about it when we initially met, and that's the Great Green Wall that's been built across the whole of Northern Africa. And maybe you could explain to our viewers what exactly it is. You're reclaiming parts of the Sahara Desert, is that right? And making it fertile again.
Well, this is an initiative that is championed by Abiy Ahmed Ali, who is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Remember, for those that don't know Abiy Ahmed Ali among your audiences, remember he's the guy in 2019 that was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for reuniting Eritrea with Ethiopia. Remember, they were one country many years ago, and then they were partitioned. But then there was a little bit of tension between the two countries. There was a cut in diplomatic ties between the countries, and so on and so forth. So the guy, when he came into power, he did his best to restore normalcy, to restore relationship between Eritrea and his country, Ethiopia. So he was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. I covered this issue when I was presenting Global Arena on the radio back in late 2019, I think, or early 2020. I think it was late 2019 when we talked about that. Of course, he's a champion of that. But then this guy is said, his image and credibility and popularity is said to have dropped since 2021, I guess, when his country, Ethiopia, went to war with some people in the Tigray region. Is a region, is a disputed region. Some people believe that it is under the control of the Ethiopian government, and other people there in the region believe that it's an independent state. So it's a very complex situation there. So this guy Abiy Ahmed is trying to also champion another thing. I asked my friend who is living in Ethiopia whether or not he's trying to get another Nobel Peace Prize. He said, well, no, it's not like that, but he's trying to come up with something very, very interesting. About
So
500.
what's happening across?
Yeah.
Just so the viewers understand, across the whole length or the whole breadth of this area of 7 countries, I believe, in Africa, they're planting. I don't know how many billion trees is it they're going to plant.
Yeah, I think it's about 650 million trees
Billion.
that were planted.
Billion. Because I know. Because I know that Ethiopia apparently planted 560 million trees in a day.
Yes, in one day. Yeah, yes, of course. This is something that I wanted to tell you. In fact, I reached out to 2 of my friends in Ethiopia to confirm to me whether that was that is a myth or a reality. They said, of course, it's a reality. But, and this is a big but, there are people who dispute that the figures might have been inflated. But whether or not the figures have been inflated, this is something that Abiy Ahmed Ali should be praised for, because the world now is battling with this issue of climate change, and the Western world, the Western countries have devised to do their possible best to remove their own carbon emission. And so, like another controversial issue is that Africa has always been at the receiving end of climate change. Most of the droughts are happening in Africa. Most of the Sahara encroachment, desert encroachment is happening in Africa. Lack of rain and so on and so forth are happening in Africa. Famine also, which is as a result of lack of rain. So a lot of things are happening in Africa as a result of climate change. So Abiy Ahmed is trying to champion this great stuff. So they confirmed to me that yes, something like that has been achieved. But there are people who think it might have been inflated. And then my friend over there in Ethiopia told me that there is this issue that if somebody has visited Ethiopia, would be given a tree to plant. And the citizens also are advised to plant trees in order to reduce this issue of desert encroachment, desertification, and so on and so forth. So this is something very, very important that other African countries should copy from. Ethiopia, remember, is a country located and situated on the Horn of Africa. That's in between North Africa and East Africa. It's more in the middle, sharing borders with Eritrea and Somalia and so on and so forth, and probably Sudan. So this is something very important.
Yeah, but there's some great news stories. The other one is, you mentioned earlier about how you're sending out the raw material oil and having to buy it back in again. But there's a huge refinery just been built. Is it? Have I got the name right? The Dangote refinery, which will be able to process 650,000 barrels of oil a day.
Yes. Yes, of course. This is one of the good news that is coming out of Africa, and particularly out of Nigeria. It's true that Dangote, the pronunciation of the name is Dangote, because the guy who is named after, or whose name is linked to the refinery, is from Kano State. He was born somewhere in the city at the heart of Kano State, in the city, in the central part of Kano State. That's a few kilometers away from our own area where we live, in an area, he's said to have grown up in an area called Alfindiki. His name is Aliko Dangote. He's the richest person in Africa, and one of the richest, if not the richest, black person in the world. He decided to build this massive refinery that is located in Lagos, arguably the commercial center of Nigeria. It has the capacity of 600 150,000 barrels a day, as you have rightly said, and it is the largest single train refinery in the world and the largest oil refinery in Africa. It is located in the area called Lekki Free Zone in Lagos State, and it was commissioned back in May 2023, this year, before the outgoing or the former president Muhammadu Buhari left office. And that event, that grand event, was attended by a lot of world leaders from different countries in the world, including the recently democratically elected president that was deposed from his office in Niger Republic, Bazoum Mohammed. So this is something very, very important. The last time I checked, the refinery has not started, is not fully operational, but it has started working. Okay, it's not like it has started completely working. There are so many things, so many great stuff coming out of the refinery, but everything, like, to be completely 100% operational, it's going to happen in the next very soon. Like, the source that I contacted told me that it's going to be fully operational very, very soon. So anytime from now, you will start seeing or experiencing oil being produced or refined there in the country.
And is it from the same area that they're going to run a gas pipe from Nigeria right into Europe? This is to make up for the gas that they're losing from not taking gas from Russia. This has got to be another great opportunity for Nigeria and the Nigerian people.
Well, I have a lot of ideas about this topic, about the gas pipeline from Nigeria to Europe. But if I will dig deep and find out more answers about it. But if it can happen, then it will put Nigeria on a very important global position, because the European countries are trying to abstain from consuming anything from Russia simply because of the what do you call it, invasion, the full-scale invasion that Russia launched in February 2022 against Ukraine, and the whole Western world, the whole Western countries are trying to back Ukraine with anything that they have, including not only the arms, but including slapping Russia with more sanctions on top of the sanctions that it has been slapped with for many years. And another argument is that, well, Russia has got a lot of countries to do business with, to do deals with. We've got the North Koreans, we've got the Chinese, and other countries. But if this happens in Nigeria, that Nigeria becomes able to produce gas that would be enough for the consumption of the European countries, so that would put Nigeria on a very important spotlight. It will have more friends, more allies, and it will have more enemies. So anybody who is pro-Putin will be an enemy of Nigeria, simply because Nigeria would be helping the enemies of Putin, and it will be it will have more allies, especially those that are friends of the West. And this would produce a lot of, will bring a lot of revenue, will add a lot of revenue generation to the country. So that will definitely be a major milestone for the country.
Let's just hope that the revenue trickles its way through to the people and not into the pockets of Western corporate oil companies and gas companies. Another huge infrastructure is down in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Grand Inga Dam, which is actually is going to bring it's going to allow the Democratic Republic of Congo to double the amount of electricity they produce. Again, this is surely and hopefully going to be a great benefit to the normal people, the ordinary people.
Yes, definitely. This is one of the greatest news that are coming out of the African continent. Of course, the Grand Inga Dam has the potential to bring prosperity to many people in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country that is located in the Central African Republic. In the central part of Africa. It is sharing border with about 9 countries. So this is one of the it's the second largest is the second largest country in terms of land size in Africa after Algeria. So this is something very, very important. It has the ability to produce upon creation, upon construction. It can create, or it will create 100 or even more, up to 100,000 jobs during the construction, and about 20,000 jobs would be created during operation of that Inga Dam. So that would be a great milestone for many people in that country that is also devastated with a lot of problems, poverty, and so on and so forth. So this is very important. But there is one challenge, as I was reading before we came up on air, that the Inga Dam is going to be built or is going to be constructed in a remote area, which means there is the need for a very good, smooth road. Infrastructure should be, physical infrastructure should be built in order to address this issue, to make the whole project and the whole things as smooth as possible. There is no, they have bad roads, so a road, like a very good road, should be built, and then a rail line should also be constructed for easy transportation of materials, both during the construction and even during the operation of that. So this is something very important. If this is achieved, then Democratic Republic of Congo is going to be on the news of not only African media organizations, but even the Western media organizations.
And is it the Chinese that are helping with this project, this infrastructure?
Well, one thing that I forgot to tell you is that it has the capacity to generate up to 39,000 megawatts of electricity, which could be used to power homes, businesses, and industries across the region. This is something very, very important. And about the Chinese involvement, China has, for an extended period of time, been building infrastructure in Africa. Remember the Kenya-Djibouti rail line train that was constructed and made by the Chinese. This is something a few years ago, I think it was in 2016 or 17. I cannot exactly remember the year. I was in secondary school, in high school. This is something that has been hailed, like the Chinese have been so hailed and praised for such massive projects. And the headquarters of African Union in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, was also built by the Chinese. It was funded by the Chinese. So Chinese investments have been very, very much present in Africa. China is trying to expand its own sphere of influence and interest on the African continent. In East Africa, Chinese companies are very much influential there. They provide free satellite to homes in Ethiopia and other East African countries. And if you are going to watch, this is when I was having an interview with a professor of Chinese films, Professor Chris Berry. He said that he read an article talking about this issue. If you want to have a satellite dish to watch Chinese films, it's free. But if you want to watch like Netflix and other Western channels, you have to pay. So the Chinese have been establishing their own presence in Africa through soft power, through their movies and cultures and scholarship programs and so on and so forth. And in Kano State here, some years ago, the Chinese have come and dominated the business of textile here in Nigeria.
But that's one of the criticisms of the West and the IMF, etc. There's too many conditions, too many strings, and there's too many people with their finger in the pie when the IMF or the Western countries are involved, and they use the stick. The West uses the stick, whereas the Chinese and the Russians in Africa are certainly using soft power to their advantage, are they not?
Well, there are many people. Okay, opinions are divided into two now. There are people in Nigeria here who think that the Chinese are better partners to Nigeria. The Chinese, the Russians, the Turkish are better partners to the African continent. This is because, as they publicly proclaim, that their own partnership or relationship with Africa is not going to be based on colonialism or colonial experiences or colonial discrimination and imperialism. Is going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. I remember in 2022, last year in August, when I was having an interview with a Nigerian journalist based in Turkey. He's working for the TRT, the Turkish media channel, TV channel. He's a producer there. He told me that he's doing his PhD thesis on this issue of Chinese and Turkish relationship in Africa and their influence in Africa. He said that the Turkish government has made it categorically clear that its relationship with Africa is going to be a win-win. So it's going to be a mutually beneficial. It's not going to be based on colonial past experiences. There are not going to be dictatorial, imperialist power or something like that. So a lot of people believe that those countries, the Eastern blocs, the Chinese, the Russians, the Turkish are going to be a better partners to the African continent, unlike the Western countries. But then other people are casting doubt that when these countries, China, Russia, Turkey, and even India, get themselves entrenched and established on the continent, and their influence starts to grow rather, we don't know what they will do. We don't know whether or not they are going to be just like the European colonial powers and so on and so forth. So it just, a lot of things remain to be seen as to whether or not our cooperation with those countries is going to be mutually beneficial. But then again, earlier you talked about multipolarity. I can remember an interview I had earlier this year with Professor Glenn Diesen. I think you need to have an interview with him. He's a professor and there at the Southeastern University, at the University of Southeastern Norway. He's a very popular guy in Russia because he spent a long time there in Russia. He wrote a book called Russophobia. I think the Russian phobia, that's the name, something like that. So he's a very popular guy in Russia because a lot of people in Russia hail him, celebrate him, because he is said to have some soft views when it comes to Russia. But at home, ironically speaking, at home in his own home country, Norway, he's heavily criticized because they say that he is more leaned to Russia and not he does not favor the Western countries. So in my interview with him, I asked him, why is it that Africa has to depend on the major powers? Shouldn't we be left alone to be on our own? He said, in this new world that we live in, it's kind of impossible for countries to be on their own. There must be cooperations, alliances, and relationships between one country, I mean, among the countries of the world. So you cannot put your own eggs in one basket. All your eggs, you cannot put them in one basket. You need to devise means of being friendly with both the West and the East. So this interview that I had with Professor Glenn Diesen was one of the best that I have ever had, because we talked about something very, very important, and this is the reality. So African countries cannot be alone on their own without leaning to one country or the other. So the question here is, which country is going to favor with the Africans? Which country is going to be more important, more beneficial, more contributory to the African countries?
Well,
so that remains to be seen.
My advice to Africa, play both sides against the middle, as they say, get the best deal you can. It's encouraging to know neither China nor Russia ever colonized Africa, unlike the Western countries. Every European country has.
Yeah, of course, a lot of people believe that, yes. Yeah, a lot of people believe that it's important for African countries, especially Nigeria, to be both friendly with the Western countries and the Eastern Bloc. So Nigeria has ambassadors in almost all these countries. I'm sure Nigeria has an ambassador in Russia, just like the way the United States has an ambassador in Russia, in Moscow. Nigeria has an ambassador in China, but does not have an ambassador in Taiwan. Look at the double standard. Nigeria does not have an ambassador in Taiwan. It has a trade commissioner. Recently, last year, I had an interview with the former Nigerian High Commissioner not a high commissioner, trade commissioner in Taiwan. They call it trade commissioner simply because if they send an ambassador to Taiwan, they are going to piss off the Chinese because China does not recognize Taiwan as a country, as an independent autonomous country. And the last time I checked, even the United States of America doesn't have an ambassador in Taiwan. They have an ambassador in Beijing. So Nigeria should be the foreign ministry of Nigeria that is responsible for the foreign policy of the country should be very careful when trading and playing games with those countries. So this is something very, very important.
Absolutely. Now we're coming towards the end. The clock's beating us here, Umar. Just a last question. Are you optimistic about the future for Africa, the short term and long term?
We should always be optimistic, not pessimistic about the future of Africa. We always keep our fingers crossed that the future is going to be much brighter than we have ever dreamed it to be. This is because there are so many important things that are happening on the continent. We have a lot of educated people on the continent that have been working in the West and contributing significantly towards the development of Western countries. I'm sure there are many Nigerian medical doctors in the UK. This is a fact. There are many Nigerian medical doctors in the UK, but what I'm not sure of is Scotland. But if you check most of your big hospitals in Scotland, you may see some Africans, if not Nigerians, specifically working and contributing significantly towards the development of health sector. Universities there are so many Nigerian academics, professors, researchers that have been contributing towards the development of education in the West. In the United States of America, we have one of the largest African communities in the United States of America. There are so many Nigerians there, and I believe there are so many Ghanaians. I know one Ghanaian American who is now a mayor, not mayor, who is now, what do you call it, councillor? Yeah, he's a city councillor of Maine, of Portland in the state of Maine. Maine, I think, is the tiniest state in the United States of America. So I had an interview with him back in 2020 on my radio show. He came to Nigeria to greet his grandmother, who happened at that time to be in Nigeria, but he's from Ghana. So there are some, remember that issue of quote unquote American dream, from grass to grace, from rags to riches, and so on and so forth. Even though there are many people who are criticizing the United States of America for so many things, but Africa has a lot of potential. We have a lot of highly educated people. We have a lot of people who are contributing to the tech industry. We have a lot of engineers, medical doctors, teachers, professors, actors, comedians, entertainers. Like, whoever you're looking for, whatever profession you're looking for, there's an African who is a master in that field. So this is one of the reasons why we have hope that Africa is going to be great in the future. And number two is multipolarity, the issue of multipolarity that you have talked about. Now, African countries are engaged in many alliances. BRICS, for example, is an alliance. Recently, they had their own summit in South Africa, even though when it was announced that South Africa was going to host the country, the summit, the country landed in trouble, in quagmire, in dilemma, because Russian President Vladimir Putin was suspected to be present at the summit. And then, remember, ICC, the International Criminal Court, has declared Russian President Putin wanted because of the war crimes that they are charging him with, or they're accusing him of in Ukraine. So they put pressure on South African government under Cyril Ramaphosa to definitely bring Russian president if he were to attend the summit. So there were a lot of debates on the continent as to whether or not the South African government was willing to give up the Russian president. South Africa is a signatory to ICC, which means if ICC is looking for a war criminal and he enters a country that is a signatory that has signed the charter, so that country must bring that person to ICC. So Russian president was said to be present there, but then thank God he didn't attend. He sent his foreign minister, I think, Sergei Lavrov, to attend on his behalf and other Russian delegations. So a lot of people had wanted to see what would have happened had the Russian president attended the summit. So alliances like BRICS is a very important thing for the African continent. Look at BRICS. What does the BRICS stand for? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So look at this. China is said to be one of the biggest, if not the second largest economy in the world after the United States, arguably, because there are people who believe now China is more economically advanced than the United States, because the US has its own problems at home that it's experiencing, and China is said to have lifted more people out of poverty than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
The Chinese have had the most effective poverty eradication program in the world. So China is in the BRICS. Russia is in BRICS. Remember, Russia has one of the largest and one of the strongest military forces in the world. So Russia is in BRICS. India is an emerging democracy, is an emerging economy. Remember, a few days ago, it hosted the G20 summit. And a lot of people have been talking about it. The champion, the star of the show was Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who has been accused for many years of running a Hindu nationalistic government, a fascist government, a government that has cracked down on minorities, especially Muslims, a government that has been very hostile towards the Muslims in Kashmir and the neighboring Pakistan. Well, this is another topic for another day. I'm very much interested in the politics in the politics of India and Pakistan. So India is present in BRICS. So if we have seen that Ethiopia, among other few countries like Iran and UAE, have been accepted. Accepted into the
Saudi Arabia, UAE, Argentina,
the alliance. Yes.
Argentina.
Yes. Yeah, they have been accepted into about 6 countries have been accepted, 6 or 9 countries have been accepted into the alliance, and they're saying that their full membership is going to be in effect in January 2024. So countries, if African countries have a lot of African countries join alliances like G20, like BRICS, it will bring stability, economic stability, and investments to the continent, because corporations, companies from China, Russia, and those countries will invest in countries like Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, where they think they have something to benefit from. And scholarship programs, of course, is something that has played a significant role in building relationships between countries. India has been giving scholarships to many people from Nigeria to study for free in India, and this is part of its own soft power. It's part of its own expansion of influence and soft power stuff. And a lot of people have been studying in Russia, China, and so on and so forth. So this is something very, very important. One good news for the African continent is that it has been admitted, like now African Union, the AU, the continental bloc for the African countries, AU, African Union, has been accepted or has been granted a full membership of G20 in the G20. But then the foreign minister of Nigeria was speaking to an Indian media organization, and he's saying that we have confidence that, and we have hope that one day Nigeria would be would be given a full membership as a country, would be given a full membership to serve on the decision-making table of the G20. And this is something very ambitious, and I believe a lot remains to be seen.
Good. Well, we want to end on ambition. The clock's beating us, Umar. The clock's beating us, as always. I want to thank you for your time and your insight today. I hope that we can count on you again to keep us updated on all the good things that are happening in Africa.
Well, yeah, it's my pleasure. I would always be happy to come on the show. So feel free to reach out whenever you need my analysis on any of the issues that are happening across the continent of Africa. As a journalist, I have contacts to reach out to, not only in Nigeria or in West Africa, but in other parts of the African continent. And of course, we'll be happy to share our own analysis with you. And even if you need an expert, a professor of political science or international relations to contribute to your own channel, I would be very much glad to make the connection possible. So we can do that. I'm looking forward to more of such engagements.
So, thank you very much, Umar. And to you, my viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I've enjoyed talking to Umar. And until I see you all again, please, take care.
Through a Scottish
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So,
unapologetically
has the recording stopped?
independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.